I hope you've all seen the Jordan Peterson interview with Cathy Newman, and if not, links below. It's a pretty good interview. I was a little bit dismayed at first because it didn't seem like he was going very hard. It didn't seem like he was calling attention to her obvious malice and dishonesty, but in the end, it wasn't even necessary because it was so obvious, and everyone knew what she was doing. Twisting his words and trying to cast him in the most unfavorable light possible. And so all he had to do was kind of methodically and calmly set her straight on all of those points where she was grossly distorting his claims. Now, one thing I am still a little dismayed about is how much he seemed to agree with her on basic assumptions and even conclusions. For example, at one point, she accused him of attempting to put obstacles in the way of women's career ambitions. And he was like, no, not at all. In fact, in my practice, I help women with assertiveness coaching, to help realize their career ambitions. And so throughout, he was just agreeing with a lot of her assumptions and a lot of her conclusions. Now, taken in context, that may be a perfectly valid rhetorical strategy to sidestep irrelevant or tangential controversies and stay on the main point, which he did a really good job of addressing the main point, which was the supposed wage gap or pay gap or earnings gap or whatever you want to call it. And so that worked. But expanding the context a little bit, it seems like Peterson, while he will take on third wave feminism and fourth wave feminism, the nuttiest stuff head on, he doesn't have much critical to say about like first and second wave feminism. And so, for example, he shares all this Iran hijab protest stuff, seemingly supportive, seemingly in favor of it, although he doesn't say much. He seems really sympathetic to like the individualist feminism of Camille Paglia and Christina Hoff Sommers. And he is, in fact, a self-described individualist who thinks that the most important function of a society or aspect of a society is the protection that it gives to individual rights and individual freedoms, presumably including women. So while he wouldn't insist on, equality of outcomes or women trying to succeed in all the same ways, exactly the same amount of the time as men, he would protect their right to enter traditionally masculine fields and to define success for themselves in a traditionally masculine way, and to compete head-to-head with men if they're willing and able. But that raises some issues. And I know Peterson himself recognizes a lot of these issues because he comments on it. How do we share hierarchies with women? We don't know how to do that. Nobody's ever tried to incorporate women into masculine dominance hierarchies before. Or if they have, which may also be likely, nobody survived to record it. Peterson notes that this leads to kind of a catch-22. If you fully unleash yourself in competition with women, you're a bully. But if you lose, you're pathetic. How do you win a game like that? One other thing that women do when they enter these institutions or organizations or firms or, traditional masculine dominance hierarchies is they try to feminize them. And this is what Cathy Newman was getting at with her talk about, making firms less competitive and less cutthroat, more cooperative, more consensus-driven. Or I don't know the exact words she used, I don't recall, but it was something to that effect. But this is a persistent and a consistent demand with women to feminize institutions, to organize them according to their sensibilities and priorities. And ultimately, the effect of that is to give women a competitive advantage over men. But also, you just can't push this very far because it's not clear that an organization can be externally competitive unless it's internally competitive, at least in a great many cases. So there are limits there. But to the extent that they do it, they hobble both men and institutions. Assortative mating. So, one thing Peterson has remarked on is that traditionally men compete for status in these dominance hierarchies, and then women mate from the top down according to their status by other criteria. So, once you throw women into this hierarchy to compete for status and positions in that hierarchy with men, how does this affect the old assortative mating scheme? And, worse than that, women now have unprecedented power and influence to determine how men rise within hierarchies and which men rise. Whether it's voting in elections or working in HR, doing hiring, firing, presiding over allegations of different kinds of misconduct. Which brings up another point. How do you deal with unreasonable women? Peterson admits this is very difficult. And, unreasonable women like Cathy, Newman, he handled that pretty well, but not everybody is Jordan Peterson, first of all. Second of all, not every situation is public like that, where everyone can see what's going on, what happened, what was said, what wasn't said. When you get into a more private situation or a more institutional situation, it's very easy for somebody who is malicious and dishonest to damage you professionally, to damage you socially, by gossiping behind your back, by making allegations, etc., so on and so forth. And, people made fun of the Pence rule when they found out about Pence not meeting with women privately without his wife. But, now with this Me Too stuff, everybody's thinking it's a great idea, and women are crying because they don't have equal access to powerful men anymore. But really, the Pence rule has been in effect forever for a lot of people. Every place I've ever worked at has employed the Pence rule with female employees. And the implication or the subtext that I always picked up was that rule was in place not so much to protect the women from actual sexual assault, but to protect men from allegations of that. All right? And especially in like a disciplinary proceeding or anything like that, the Pence rule would be observed with all female employees all the time at everywhere that I've ever worked. And that was to protect the men from retaliation. All right? Tremendous cost for organizations and institutions. Finally, social justice. This is kind of the politics of feminine sensibilities. It is maybe a political expression of toxic femininity. And Jordan Peterson admits that, including women in politics is probably one of the factors leading to the rise of the social justice stuff. So, huge cost, huge consequence. And all of this leads to some pretty good arguments against first and second wave feminism. Giving women the vote. That was dumb, quite simply because women vote dumb. All right? There is not one issue that I'm aware of any consequence where women on average vote better than similar men or equivalent men. All other factors being equal. There might be such an issue, there might be such a subject matter where women do vote better than men, but if it is, that exception is an exception. It's not the rule. Now obviously this is a huge generalization. But, what advantage was there in including women in politics? They don't bring any unique wisdom or insight to political questions. Formerly, the family, the household, was the arena for compromise between the sexes, the different priorities and sensibilities and values and strategies of men and women. And those conflicts were solved by compromise within the household, within the family. They didn't rise to the political arena. But now they do rise to the political arena because men and women vote independently. And so those conflicts rise to the political arena. They aren't settled by compromise in the household. And so now, in a very real sense, women are the enemy because they vote dumb. And they vote to advance their interests by harming men's. And also, to a very large extent, by harming their own because they don't understand causality at that scale. They don't understand costs and consequences at that scale. They don't understand incentives at that scale. Their intuitions are not tuned to that scale and to those kind of problems. So it just causes more problems, allowing those to be let loose in a political context. Now, why do we let men vote? That's an interesting question. We let men vote because it's cheaper than fighting them. That's why we let men vote. Even if it costs something to lose an election to another group of men, it could be cheaper than fighting them. Especially if the outcome of an election and then the outcome of a fight are going to be the same. But, women don't fight. So, whatever they win in an election, that's a freebie. They weren't going to fight you anyway. So you're just giving them something for nothing. And furthermore, Peterson recognizes that men and women are different in this respect, that in every conversation between men, there's an implied threat of violence. Women don't understand that. And in politics, this is even more so because politics is violence, or it's a substitute for violence. And so women just don't understand that. Men do, or at least the kind of men who traditionally voted do understand that. Before universal male suffrage even. Aristocrats understood that violence was the alternative to voting, and so when you win, you have to restrain yourself. Because if you don't restrain yourself, the loser may try and appeal to, the martial veto. And, the loser understood that if the winner's not being too unreasonable, it's cheaper to submit to an electoral defeat than risk a military defeat. So that's why we let men vote, because they can fight you, but women won't fight you, at least not on a large organized scale. So giving them the vote is giving them something for nothing. It is parasitic. Working. It's not clear that including large numbers of women in the labor force has made anyone or very many people better off. It's made the owners of capital better off because that puts downward pressure on wages and gooses profits in the upward direction. Hasn't made families better off. It's made tax collecting authorities better off because it moved people out of the untaxed domestic economy and into the taxed market economy. That hasn't made families better off. There are a few people it's made better off, but it's not clear that including women in the workforce in large numbers has made people on the whole better off. Sexual liberation, like voting, that's kind of an unqualified disaster. All right? And I don't have much more time here, but broadly speaking, it's because sexual licentiousness and promiscuity are not conducive to the formation and stability of families. That's necessary for a society. And this brings us back to the hijab thing again, because modesty is a necessary virtue and a necessary duty. It's tied up with things like chastity and fidelity, which again are critical to family formation and stability. All right? So criticizing Iran's hijab laws is kind of silly because the West has modesty standards too. Western women are required to cover their genitals in public. And I'm supposed to be mad that Iranian women are expected to cover their hair? Are all modesty standards bad? What's the argument here? Are some objectively better than others? I think the most defensible position is that, all actually existing societies have some modesty standards, but maybe their content is a little bit relative. So on what basis are we criticizing Iran's and, defending Iranian feminism as Jordan Peterson appears to be doing? So, there are serious issues here. There are real issues here with women voting, with women working, with incorporating women into masculine hierarchies, and, with sexual liberation. These are all really old things, second and first wave feminism. Serious issues with these. I know Peterson knows about them. It just doesn't seem like he notices, but it doesn't follow the logic out to any of its implications. It'd be interesting to see him explore some of these some more and, maybe realize that there's more to feminism and there's more to the problem of feminism than just these shrieking blue-haired, fish-mouthed, problem glasses harpies.